and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you very much for coming to our session. I will give a brief introduction. I mean, this was organized together with Michael Spranger, who is here. And we have basically 4 contributions. I will give a short introduction about, And then we have a contribution by Tao Wong from ETS in US, but his roots are in Hong Kong, right? Is that true? Or in China in any case?
In China.
And then we have a contribution by Michael Spranger about spatial language, and then finally a contribution which is coming from historical linguistics point of view by Freek van der Velde, who is from Leuven in Belgium. Okay, so first, what are we going to talk about? Yesterday, Calouste Gulbenkian said we don't have any data about language, to study language evolution. Now, I think that is a mistake. We have vast amounts of data. These data are collected by historical linguists, here are a few, but these days also we can get data from language use through social media and web and things like that. So, and when you look at these data, you find that, of course, there is language drift, so sound changes or lexical changes. Nobody will deny that. But there's also language innovation. And we have been looking, for example, at Twitter or also at these media like 4chan, which are very quick and changing. And then you see that these innovations are happening all the time under our nose. So there is a lot of data about, not only drift, but also innovation, new sounds, new meanings, new words, shifts in grammatical patterns. Of course, in historical linguistics, we know about that determiners were at some point there, then they were not. The tense aspect systems, case systems, they're all constantly evolving, constantly being created and changing. And so this creates a large number of puzzles. And I work actually today at the moment I work in an evolutionary biology lab. And there what everybody is doing is to say you have a species at one stage, for example, no lungs, and then you see that the species has a variant with lungs, and so this is always about going from A to B. How can you explain that these lungs emerged? I think we can do the same, or we have to do the same for language evolution. And we say, okay, we have a stage, for example, single words, and then how do you go to multi-words? Or you have a language without any color terms, and then you see that there are color terms. Or determiners, no determiners, like Latin, system of determiners like Italian, etc. No nasalization, you see nasal sounds like in French, and so on, but also no constituent structure, and then you see constituent structure. So there's a huge number of puzzles like that, which I think is what we should work on. And there is huge data. I mean, historical linguists have done a fantastic job in collecting data about all of these things. So we have to study them and see what kind of mechanisms are underlying them. Now, the thing that we're going to talk about is how can we make mechanistic models of these various transitions? What is a mechanistic model? Well, we choose some feature of language, for example, color, or spatial language, left, right, front, back, or phonemes. Then we identified the mechanisms that could explain that feature, the emergence of that feature. Now, these mechanisms are at 3 levels. First of all, we need to understand what cognitive mechanisms that the individual needs in order to deal with this feature. For example, if you want to do color, then, well, at least you need color perception. You need a way to categorize colors, and so on. So you need, for each of these things, you need cognitive mechanisms. Not one, but usually it's a combination of mechanisms. And then, and they include, of course, learning mechanisms. They also include things like alignment or invention of a new word or a new phoneme or a new color category and so on. So this is the individual. And then when we also have to look at the collective mechanisms. That means how does structure emerge in a population? For example, how can there be a shared phonological system? Or how can there be a shared color categories? And so you have various kinds of mechanisms, collective mechanisms. One of them is self-organization, which you see in an ant colony that's self-organizing to create a path between a food source and the nest. But you also have a very powerful theory of collective structure. Emergence is selection, because selection is the main explanatory theory for evolutionary biology, but we can also apply it to the cultural level in order to explain how innovation gets selected and how innovation is spreading and how you can get organisms or language features that are adapted to the needs of the population. So you have the collective, and then you need also think about the ecological mechanisms. What are the needs of the speakers that need to be satisfied in order to push the increase in complexity of the language? And so, the environmental complexity that you need in order to communicate with each other and solve tasks in a complex environment. For example, if we're always together in a situated context when we talk, that's a different situation than if we talk on the phone, where we have to explain, much more about the situation because the other person doesn't share directly the setup. So that's an example of ecological pressures that arise. And then we have to define the selection criteria, if we're talking about an evolutionary process, that will, cause evolution to happen. Well, cause, no, I shouldn't say that, which is a sort of the underlying force that is needed. And so there are certainly 2, and there are more, but these are the most important ones, is reaching communicative success. That means having success in achieving a particular task for which you use language, but also to minimize cognitive effort, because if you want to express more, then you have to dampen the complexity of your processing in order to increase the expressive power. I should have added satisfy expressive power, actually, as one of the criteria. And then, and now we get to the topic of this panel here. So you can do that. You could do psychological experiments to research these mechanisms. You could do mathematical modeling, maybe, for collective processes, maybe game theory, other kinds of things like that. But in this session, we are going to look at efforts that started in the mid-90s, around 1995, to do, you could say, synthetic experiments, which means that you operationalize all these mechanisms and these various selection criteria in terms of an agent-based model. And then you set up a benchmark experiment. And so I will give an example in a minute. And then when you have done all that, then you run the experiment, you get a population of agents, you know, you let them go, and you see what happens. This is exactly like, let's say, a chemical experiment, where you put a number of stuff together in a bottle, you know, you shake it, you wait a little bit, sometimes it explodes, but sometimes you see the emergent structure, like the Belousov-Sabotinsky reaction. Or an experiment in biology, where you have organisms, you know, or cells that you put together in a certain context, and you let it go and you see what happens. So this is the idea, and then you see whether the feature that you wanted to investigate indeed emerges as a side effect of the experiment. So the big thing is not to put in the feature that you want to explain, right? Now this is easier said than done, but if you see the feature emerge at the very end, then the experiment is successful, and the claim is then that the model you made explains how these features might originate. So for example, if you're interested in case grammar, okay, then maybe you initialize the agents with a language system without case grammar, and then of course you put in learning mechanisms, maybe templates and all sorts of things, okay, as possible source of explanation. You turn on the whole system and you look whether at the end of the day or the week or the year, depending on the amount of computing power you have, you know, you see whether indeed there is a case grammar. Obviously, you won't see the German case grammar or the Russian case grammar, right? You will see a system emerge that has similar properties as the ones that we see in natural language. So it is an artificial language. And, well, sometimes our papers get rejected because people say it's about artificial languages and not natural languages. But this is theoretical studies, right? It's theoretical linguistics. Okay, so now maybe I should say about agent-based models, this is maybe not so common knowledge, although let me just ask, how many people make agent-based models or know what it is? Okay, well, a fair number. So, but for those who don't, I just want to say that an agent-based model, the idea originally came from Thomas Schelling, who is a sociologist. And of course, agent-based models are also used in biology, but in social science, he is interested in how you see in a city different populations living in different areas of the city. So this is Antwerp is actually clustered. And then the question is, how does that come about? And he made an agent-based model where each agent is making certain decisions about how happy the agent is feeling, you know, with respect to the neighbors. And then if not, they move. And so if you start from a random situation, then after a while you get a kind of structure, which is not controlled, you know, top down. It's not the plan of the city to have segregation, but it's an outcome of the simulation. And Schelling, maybe you never heard of it, but he got the Nobel Prize in economics for his work, so I don't know whether we will get the Nobel Prize for doing something similar for language evolution. I'm not counting on it, but you know. Anyway, so this is the origin of this idea. And then for agent-based models, you start with the cognitive mechanisms, as I explained before. The agents are members of a population. Why do we need a population? Because obviously language is in a population, right? If you have only one agent, why would you create language? Even if you have only two agents, that is not good enough, because then the two are always talking with each other, even if they take turns speaking and here, you know, they're always in the same situation together. So the real part of the difficulty is that they are not, and that some people there invent a word, and then here there's an alternative word, and you get variation in the population. And then you get the problem how they reach coherence and all these things. So you need a population. The population can be static or can be dynamic, so that new members come into the population. And Tao will talk in particular about the effect of population size and change, right, on the emergent language. The agents interact with each other to achieve a particular goal. The interaction involves communication as a sub-goal, and then you have these criteria that I talked about before. You know, are they successful in the task? Are they reaching communicative success, etc. Okay, I'm just going to quickly give, in a few slides, this is only a taste, because you have to go to the literature. There's now really hundreds of papers about this. This is an example of experiments for the emergence of color terms and color categories. Because I should say, in most of these experiments, it's not just about language, it's also about meaning and the co-evolution of language and meaning. And so this is a game. Now, in this case, we actually have done a lot of experiments where the agents are robots. Why robots? Because, you know, language is about the world, right? And so there's the perception and the interaction and the pointing and the point of view from which they look at situations. So we really go all the way to this kind of agents. And then, my time is running fast here, but we put in all sorts of mechanisms. So it's not a tabula rasa. There's a lot of cognitive mechanisms that we need to get there, but of course what we don't put in are color categories or color names, because that's the thing we would like to understand, how that emerges. And so, again, I won't go into the details how we implement all this, but this is just an example, a small experiment. Sometimes they are with 1,000 agents, sometimes here only 5. But this is a typical outcome of these experiments, which we would like to see, is that they start, this blue line is the success they have in communication, which is 0 at starting time. So the game here is like a game with Munsell chips, you know, colored chips, and the speaker selects one, then categorizes the color, names the color to the listener tries to find which chip was chosen by the speaker, then he points to it. And if that's correct, then the game is a success. If not, then it could be that the listener never heard this word before, you know, then he can learn from the speaker. So it's a complete interaction, situated, embodied in a particular environment. Anyway, so these games are being played. You see the success in communication going up from 0. You see the green line is the alignment between the agents, so the variance in interpretation, and this is the number of color categories that they evolve in this experiment. And of course, the great thing is that, different from children or adults, you know, we see everything that they're doing, right? We can look inside, what are their color categories, what are their associations. And so these are the prototypes that the different agents have for the words that they were inventing when they were playing this game. You see a lot of variation still, you know, gradually becoming more similar in their prototypes and in the use of the words until you get a lexicon, a color category lexicon like this. So this is an example of that. And this here is a paper about these experiments in BBS. So you see, by the way, this is from 2005, because as I said, these things have been going on since roughly 1995, so there's already quite a substantial literature, although I would say generally it's not very well known. Okay. I already said many of these things, you know, we need a multi-agent setup because language is in a population. The population can be static or dynamic. Often we scaffold the agents, and then because we're interested in one particular feature of language. Why? Because to have the whole evolution happening, you know, is at this point not realistic, right? I mean, that was my dream would be that we have a population of, let's say, I don't know, 20, 30 robots in a particular environment, maybe a room like this, and they're doing all sorts of things in this room, you know, and they start up without any language whatsoever, and 1 year later we come back to see whether they have recursive syntax. So far I haven't been able to find the money to do this kind of experiment, but then maybe this is for the next generation, for you to do it. Anyway, yeah, I mentioned all these things. It's very important that there's no central controller. There's nobody that tells the agents what to do. Language is a democratic process, you know, we can all contribute. And there should not be any telepathy between, even though with robots we can easily do that. Telepathy means we cannot see what you see, right? I cannot look in your brain to know what your prototype is of a color. I think the chairman is not paying attention to the... Stop, it says. Okay, but I'm finished. I should just say that over the years, there have been quite a few experiments. Unfortunately, they haven't been, there's no inventory really, and no, you know, not yet any book that I could say, read this book and then you know all about it. We're still in the phase of creative excitement that we want to do the next experiment rather than write a paper or a book. But I would say that the single word, for single word utterances, either expressing a single category or multiple categories, we have lots of things. We have mathematical proofs of convergence, scaling laws. You know, this has been studied in great detail, so we can do that. There's also work here on multi-word utterances, so without any grammar, you know, for a single referent and for multiple reference, for relations, and Michael will talk about that also. Also for second order, like very big, how adverbs can emerge, and for perspective, like ball on your left and not on my left. So things have been done a lot here, both on the semantic side and on the, let's say, form side. There has been work, and I will tomorrow give a talk about this, in the emergence of hierarchical structure using level formation mechanisms at the collective level. Not only for constituent structure, which Freek will talk about, you know, but also using agreement as a marking of hierarchical structure. There's a +1 paper about that. And finally, there has been work, but in my view, certainly we are just at the beginning of it, to model grammaticalization processes. So to use grammaticalization in the sense of using existing materials, you know, to expand them to deal with new challenges. And then these processes of compaction to get morphology or erosion, you know, that things disappear, requiring new inventions to happen. Also bleaching of the meaning structures so that you get, for example, grammatical function words. And You know, but all of this requires also, for example, a point that you made this morning, that the grammatical categories are emerging. You know, we don't put in grammatical categories. We don't put in how, whether agreement or word order should be used and things like that. So, conclusion, well, this, yeah. Yes. Conclusion, well, I gave my conclusions. I just want to point out that if you're really interested, we build a lot of tools to do these experiments. And one is called Babel, to set up agents, populations, get linguistic structures and things like that. So you can download it, you can play with it. All our papers have been done with these tools. One of them is a fluid construction grammar is the fundamental linguistic mechanism that we use. So on this, you can see examples and download stuff. And well, there are a couple of, there are lots of papers, but I just want to make a bit of publicity. There is a series in this domain with the Language Science Press, and this is open access, so you can download for free. And this is pointing to one book from, originally from '99 actually, but and then you can also see other publications on spatial language, on color, and on other domains. And I would invite you, if you are working in agent-based modeling, you know, and you, or one of your students has written a thesis in this domain, then contact me, and this could be published in this series. Okay.